On the night of March 3rd, Detective Sarah Chen stood in the security office of the Grandview Hotel, watching footage that should have been impossible. Marcus Holloway, a 34-year-old software engineer, walked through the lobby doors at 9:47 p.m., leaving the company party early. But 17 minutes later, at 10:04 p.m., he walked through those same doors again. Same suit, same gait, same face. The problem? Marcus Holloway had been found dead in his apartment at 9:52 p.m., 5 minutes before his second departure. What began as a simple case of a man leaving a party early became one of the most perplexing mysteries in the city's history. Chapter 1. The Party. The Grandview Hotel's ballroom was alive with celebration on the evening of March 3rd. TechVision Industries had rented the entire 10th floor for its annual gala, a tradition meant to recognize employee achievements and foster company unity. 200 staff members filled the space, dressed in formal attire, mingling beneath crystal chandeliers and sampling appetizers from silver trays. Marcus Holloway arrived at 7:30, precisely on time, as was his nature. Colleagues knew him as dependable, methodical, and reserved. He was a senior software engineer who had been with TechVision for 8 years, rising steadily through the ranks without fanfare or controversy. Those who worked closely with him described Marcus as brilliant but distant, the kind of person who excelled at solving complex problems but struggled with small talk. That evening, however, Marcus seemed more distracted than usual. His supervisor, Angela Morrison, later recalled seeing him check his phone repeatedly throughout dinner. When she approached to congratulate him on a recent project milestone, Marcus responded with polite acknowledgement but kept glancing toward the ballroom entrance as if expecting someone. Other attendees noticed similar behavior. Marcus positioned himself near the edges of the room rather than joining groups at the center tables. He declined offers to dance, barely touched his meal, and consumed only water despite the open bar. When co-workers attempted conversation, his responses were brief and mechanical. His mind appeared to be elsewhere entirely. At approximately 9:30, Marcus received a phone call. Witnesses observed him step into the hotel corridor to take it, his expression tightening as he listened to whoever was on the other end. The call lasted less than 2 minutes, but when Marcus returned to the ballroom, his demeanor had shifted. He no longer lingered at the periphery. Instead, he moved purposefully toward the exit. Angela intercepted him near the coat check. She asked if everything was all right, concerned by his sudden urgency. Marcus assured her he was fine, but explained he needed to leave early. A headache, he said, one that had been building all evening. He apologized for departing before the awards ceremony and promised to catch up on Monday. To Angela and others nearby, the explanation seemed reasonable if disappointing. Marcus collected his coat, shook a few hands, and walked toward the elevator bank. Security cameras captured him descending to the lobby, crossing the marble floor with measured steps, and exiting through the front doors at exactly 9:47 p.m. The valet retrieved his car, a silver sedan that had been parked in the hotel garage. Marcus tipped the attendant, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled away from the curved driveway. Traffic cameras later confirmed his vehicle heading east on Maple Avenue, toward the residential neighborhood where he lived alone in a modest apartment. Back at the Grandview, the party continued without him. Music played, speeches were delivered, and awards were handed out. Marcus's absence went largely unnoticed in the crowd. For most attendees, it was simply another corporate event winding down toward its inevitable conclusion. But even as glasses clinked and laughter echoed through the ballroom, something had already gone terribly wrong. Miles away, in the quiet of his third-floor apartment, Marcus Holloway lay motionless on his kitchen floor. The headache he had mentioned was not the reason he left the party early. It was an excuse, carefully chosen to avoid suspicion. The truth was far more sinister, and within minutes, it would shatter the illusion of a simple early departure. Chapter 2. The Discovery. At 9:52 p.m., patrol officers Michael Reyes and Jennifer Tan arrive at 1840 Westbrook Avenue in response to a disturbance call. The building was a quiet 3-story complex inhabited mostly by young professionals and retirees. Calls from this address were rare, which made the report all the more concerning. The complainant was Eleanor Griffin, a retired schoolteacher who lived in the apartment directly below Marcus Holloway's unit. She had contacted emergency services after hearing what she described as a heavy crash followed by prolonged silence. Eleanor explained that she knew her upstairs neighbor kept to himself and maintained a predictable routine. The sudden noise at an hour when he was typically out seemed wrong to her, wrong enough to warrant concern. Officers Reyes and Tan climbed the stairwell to the third floor and knocked on apartment 3C. There was no response. They knocked again, louder this time, identifying themselves as police. Still nothing. A faint odor lingered in the hallway, subtle but distinct. Reyes recognized it immediately, the metallic scent of blood. Building management was contacted, and a master key was obtained. When the door swung open, both officers instinctively drew their weapons. The apartment's interior was dark except for a light emanating from the kitchen. They announced their presence again, moving cautiously through the entryway. What they found in the kitchen would later be described in official reports with clinical detachment, but the scene itself was anything but detached. Marcus Holloway lay face down on the tile floor, his body positioned near the refrigerator. Blood had pooled beneath him, spreading outward in a dark, irregular stain. His suit jacket was still on, the fabric now soaked through. There were no signs of struggle elsewhere in the apartment, no overturned furniture or broken glass. Just Marcus, alone and lifeless. Officer Tan immediately radioed for paramedics and homicide detectives while Reyes secured the scene. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. A living room with a single couch and television, a bedroom with neatly made bed, and the kitchen where Marcus now lay. Everything appeared orderly except for the body itself. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, but confirmed what the officers already knew. Marcus Holloway was dead. Preliminary assessment suggested he had been deceased for at least 30 to 45 minutes, placing the time of death somewhere between 9 and 9:30 p.m. A single stab wound to the chest appeared to be the cause, delivered with enough force to pierce vital organs. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the scene shortly after 10 p.m. A 15-year veteran of the Homicide Division, Chen had investigated dozens of murders, but this case immediately struck her as unusual. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had been locked from the inside when officers arrived. Marcus's wallet, phone, and keys were all accounted for, ruling out robbery. The apartment showed no evidence of a struggle, suggesting Marcus either knew his attacker or had been caught completely off guard. Chun began photographing the scene, while forensic technicians processed for fingerprints and trace evidence. She noted the position of the body, the blood spatter patterns on nearby cabinets, and the lack of defensive wounds on Marcus's hands. Whoever had done this had done it quickly and efficiently. Then came the detail that would transform the investigation entirely. One of the forensic technicians discovered a formal event program on the kitchen counter. It was from TechVision Industries' annual gala, scheduled for that very evening at the Grandview Hotel. Marcus's name was listed among the attendees. Chen immediately contacted the hotel. The concierge confirmed that the event was still ongoing and that Marcus Holloway had indeed been present earlier in the evening. In fact, staff remembered him leaving around 9:45, citing illness. The timeline made no sense. If Marcus had left the party at 9:45 and his apartment was a 15-minute drive away, he could not have arrived home, been murdered, and been dead for 30 to 45 minutes by the time officers discovered him at 9:52. The math simply did not work. Chen requested immediate access to the Grandview Hotel security footage. What she discovered there would turn a confusing murder into something far more disturbing. Chapter 3: The Impossible Footage. Detective Sarah Chen sat in the Grandview Hotel security office at 11:15 p.m., her eyes fixed on a bank of monitors displaying footage from multiple cameras. The hotel's head of security, Raymond Costa, stood beside her, navigating through archived recordings with practiced efficiency. The first segment showed exactly what witnesses had described. At 9:47 p.m., Marcus Holloway exited the elevator, crossed the lobby, and departed through the main entrance. His movements were unhurried, his posture upright, his expression neutral. He collected his car from the valet and drove away. Nothing about the footage appeared suspicious or unusual. Chen requested that Costa continue playing forward. She watched guests come and go, the lobby relatively quiet for Saturday evening. Then, at 10:04 p.m., something impossible appeared on screen. Marcus Holloway walked back into the hotel. He came through the same entrance he had used 17 minutes earlier, wearing the same charcoal suit, the same black shoes, even the same burgundy tie. His gait was identical, his facial features unmistakable. He moved through the lobby with the same measured pace, stepped into the elevator, and ascended back to the 10th floor. Chun felt her pulse quicken. She checked the timestamp again. 10:04 p.m. Marcus had been confirmed dead at 9:52 p.m., his body already cooling by the time officers arrived. Yet here he was, or someone who looked exactly like him, returning to the party as if nothing had happened. Costa replayed the segment 3 times at Chen's request. Each viewing confirmed the same disturbing reality. The man entering the hotel at 10:04 p.m. was visually indistinguishable from the man who had left at 9:47 p.m. Chen immediately headed to the 10th floor. The gala was winding down, guests beginning to depart in small groups. She identified Angela Morrison and pulled her aside for questioning. Had Marcus returned to the party after leaving? Angela's answer was unequivocal. Yes. She had seen him briefly around 10 or 10:15 near the bar. She remembered being surprised since he had mentioned feeling unwell. When she approached to ask if he was feeling better, Marcus had seemed distracted, offered a vague response about forgetting something, and disappeared again within minutes. Angela assumed he had retrieved whatever he needed and left for good. 2 other employees corroborated the sighting. Both described seeing Marcus on the 10th floor between 10 and 10:20 p.m. One recalled him checking his phone near the restrooms. Another remembered him standing alone by the windows overlooking the city, his back turned to the crowd. Chen's mind raced through possibilities. A twin? An impersonator? Some elaborate hoax? She returned to the security office and requested footage from every camera covering the 10th floor during the time Marcus supposedly reappeared. The recordings showed him arriving via elevator at 10:05 p.m., moving through the ballroom periphery, and then exiting again at 10:19 p.m. He took the same elevator down, walked through the lobby, and left through the front entrance. His car, however, did not appear in the valet area this time. The footage showed him walking past the driveway and continuing on foot down the street, eventually disappearing from the camera's range. Chun felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting but not yet connecting. If Marcus had been murdered in his apartment by approximately 9:15 or 9:30 p.m., then the person at the Grandview Hotel at 9:47 p.m. was not Marcus at all. It was someone impersonating him, creating a false timeline to suggest Marcus had been alive and well much later than he actually was. But who could replicate another person so convincingly? The footage showed no signs of prosthetics or disguise. The person on camera moved like Marcus, carried himself like Marcus, and even had the same subtle mannerisms. Chun pulled Marcus's employee file from TechVision's Human Resources Department. She scanned through his personal information, employment history, and emergency contacts. Then she found it, a single line buried in his original application from 8 years prior. Family, 1 sibling. Daniel Holloway. Status, estranged. Chen's hands moved quickly across the keyboard, running Daniel Holloway's name through every available database. What emerged was a profile that had been deliberately obscured, a man who had changed his identity multiple times, moved frequently, and avoided leaving traces. But beneath the aliases and false addresses, one fact became unmistakably clear. Daniel Holloway was Marcus's identical twin. Chapter 4. The Truth Unravels. Detective Sarah Chen spent the early hours of March 4th reconstructing a relationship that had been hidden for over 2 decades. Marcus and Daniel Holloway were born 34 years earlier to Patricia and Robert Holloway, a middle-class couple in suburban Connecticut. The twins had been inseparable as children, sharing not just physical appearance, but interests, ambitions, and a deep bond that their parents described as almost telepathic. But that bond fractured in their early 20s. Records showed that Daniel had been arrested for fraud at age 23, a scheme involving identity theft and financial manipulation. Marcus, then a college student, had testified against him during the trial, providing evidence that led to Daniel's conviction and a 3-year prison sentence. The betrayal shattered their relationship irreparably. After his release, Daniel vanished. He changed his name, moved across state lines, and severed all contact with family. Marcus rarely spoke of having a twin, and those who knew him at TechVision had no idea Daniel existed. For more than a decade, the brothers lived separate lives, one building a legitimate career in software engineering, the other drifting through aliases and schemes that kept him just outside the law's reach. Chen discovered that their estrangement had only deepened when their father passed away 2 years earlier. Robert Holloway's will left everything to Marcus, explicitly excluding Daniel due to his criminal history. The inheritance was substantial, a paid-off home, savings accounts, and investments totaling nearly $500,000. Daniel received nothing. Phone records obtained through a warrant showed that Marcus had received a call from an unknown number on the afternoon of March 3rd, just hours before the gala. Chen traced the number to a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store near the city limits. That phone had been used only twice, once to call Marcus and once to call him again at 9:30 p.m. while he was at the party. The second call was the one witnesses had seen Marcus take in the hallway, the conversation that had changed his demeanor and prompted his early departure. Chen theorized that Daniel had lured Marcus home with some urgent claim, perhaps a family emergency or a promise to finally reconcile. Marcus, always methodical but also deeply principled, would have felt obligated to respond, even to a brother who had betrayed him years earlier. Forensic analysis of Marcus's apartment revealed additional evidence. A second set of fingerprints was found on the kitchen counter and refrigerator handle, prints that matched Daniel Holloway's record from his arrest 15 years prior. DNA recovered from beneath Marcus's fingernails suggested there had been a brief struggle, enough for Marcus to fight back momentarily before the fatal blow. The timeline Chen constructed painted a clear picture. Daniel had called Marcus around 9:30 p.m., fabricating an emergency that required Marcus to come home immediately. Marcus left the party at 9:47 p.m., but Daniel had already been waiting in the apartment, having picked the lock or obtained a key through unknown means. The confrontation occurred quickly. Daniel stabbed his brother, watched him die, and then executed the second phase of his plan. Daniel had come to the party dressed identically to Marcus, knowing his twin's schedule and appearance well enough to replicate both. He parked several blocks away, entered the Grandview on foot at 10:04 p.m., and made himself visible to establish an alibi. The brief appearance suggested Marcus had been alive and well at the hotel, creating confusion about the time of death and deflecting suspicion. But Daniel had underestimated the precision of modern forensics and the thoroughness of investigators like Chen. The valet records, the security footage, and the medical examiner's determination of death all combined to expose the impossible. Marcus could not have been in two places at once. An arrest warrant was issued for Daniel Holloway on March 5th. He was apprehended 3 days later at a motel in upstate New York, traveling under one of his aliases. In his possession were Marcus's car keys, wallet, and a handwritten note detailing account numbers and passwords for the inheritance Daniel believed should have been his. During interrogation, Daniel showed no remorse. He claimed Marcus had stolen his life by testifying against him years earlier, that the inheritance was merely the final insult in a long history of betrayal. He admitted to planning the murder for months, studying Marcus's routines, obtaining duplicate clothing, and waiting for the perfect opportunity. The company gala had provided exactly that, a public event where Daniel could create an alibi while simultaneously eliminating the brother he blamed for all his failures. Daniel Holloway was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case became a grim reminder of how deeply family wounds can fester, how resentment can calcify into something monstrous, and how even the closest bonds can shatter beyond repair. For those who knew Marcus, his death was a tragedy compounded by the cruelty of its architect. He had been a man who valued honesty, precision, and doing the right thing, even when it cost him personally. In the end, those very qualities had made him vulnerable to someone who shared his face but possessed none of his integrity. The Grandview Hotel still hosts corporate events on its 10th floor. Security footage is now monitored more closely, timestamps cross-referenced with guest lists, and valet records kept indefinitely. But no amount of surveillance can prevent the kind of betrayal that comes from within, the kind that wears a familiar face and strikes when trust is offered. Marcus Holloway left a party early on the night of March 3rd. But the man who returned 17 minutes later was not him. It was his ghost, worn by a brother who had already ensured Marcus would never leave anywhere again.